In the previous video, we discussed the history of monotheism from a secular perspective. This time, our focus is Moses, a central figure in the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The question is simple, but the implications are significant. How do secular historians view Moses? From the standpoint of academic history, the answer may be disappointing for many believers. The existence of Moses as a historical figure is highly questionable. To this day, there is not a single non-religious written source that mentions Moses. All information about him comes exclusively from religious texts. Most historians agree that the large-scale Exodus story, millions of Israelites fleeing Egypt, almost certainly did not occur. However, this does not mean the entire story is fictional. It is possible that there was indeed a small group of Semitic slaves who escaped from Egypt, very limited in number, led by a charismatic figure. This individual, in secular hypotheses, later became the prototype for the figure of Moses. The story of this figure underwent major amplification during the Babylonian exile. After the kingdom of Judah was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar II, the Jewish elite, particularly nobles and priests, lived in a state of profound loss: land, power, and identity. In this traumatic context, the narrative of Moses and the Exodus was reworked in a highly hyperbolic form in the Old Testament texts, not merely as a historical record, but as a tool for constructing collective identity. The Jewish people as God's chosen nation, once liberated from slavery. Christian tradition later adopted this narrative directly, without historical deconstruction, and made it a theological foundation. One important indication of this historical construction can be seen in changes in the concept of divinity in early Israelite tradition. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that early Israelites did not practice strict monotheism. They worshipped El, the chief god of Canaan, alongside other Canaanite deities. Yahweh, meanwhile, does not appear to originate from the Canaanite tradition. He was very likely the supreme god of the Midianites, a nomadic people in the southern Levant. Geographically, this makes sense. Escape routes for slaves fleeing Egypt toward Canaan would almost certainly have passed through Midian. A direct return to Canaan would have been distant and dangerous. This small group is thought to have come into direct contact with Midianite culture and beliefs, including the worship of Yahweh. When they eventually returned and integrated with communities in Canaan, the concept of Yahweh came with them and gradually replaced El as the national god of Israel. This scenario directly contradicts the biblical narrative, which claims that Israel was a single, large community of Moses' followers who left Egypt and then conquered the Promised Land. According to historians, Israelite identity actually emerged from within Canaan itself. Canaanites, farmers, semi-nomadic groups, and highland communities gradually formed a new identity that later became known as Israel. In other words, the Canaanites were the ancestors of the Israelites, not a population that was conquered. This also helps explain contradictions in the stories of conflict between Israel and the Philistines, popularized through the tale of David and Goliath. Historically, the Philistines were migrants from the Aegean region, likely from Crete or Greece, who settled along the Levantine coast. The conflicts were not between natives and invaders, but between coastal migrants and Canaanite highland communities. Islamic tradition offers an interesting perspective and, in some respects, aligns more closely with secular historical conclusions. The Quran never specifies the number of Moses' followers who left Egypt. Moses is also described as receiving revelation in Midian, a region historically associated with Yahweh and early monotheism. Crucially, in Islam, Moses is not portrayed as a socially successful prophet. He is repeatedly rejected by his own people. Even after liberation, his community repeatedly returns to idol worship. Furthermore, Islam holds that the Torah in its current form is not a pure divine revelation, but has undergone interference and alteration by Jewish priests. This view indirectly aligns with modern academic conclusions about the redactional processes behind the Old Testament texts. From this emerges an intriguing historical speculation. Could it be that Jewish priests during the Babylonian exile were actually returning to the teachings of Moses? Was the destruction of their kingdom understood as punishment for betraying Mosaic monotheism? And did this collective sense of guilt drive them to rewrite, compile, and canonize Mosaic traditions into the grand narrative we now know as the Old Testament? These questions cannot be answered with certainty, but from a secular historical perspective, Moses appears less as a single historical figure and more as a symbol, a product of collective memory, political trauma, and a nation's need for identity. This is where history and faith diverge, not to negate one another, but to show that they operate according to very different logics.